on your screens. Alireza Firouzja needs that fire, needs the speed.
He does, but will that even be enough with 11 seconds? And Magnus just playing this on endlessly, gives a check, drives the Black King away. Magnus Carlsen winning now.
In the final of the eSport Cup, what happened was crazy, especially at the end game. Let's have a look at this game between Magnus and Firouzja. Magnus started with the white pieces d4. Firouzja chooses the Slav defense here by c6, and after knight f3 and knight f6, knight c3 here, Magnus played. a6, this is what's so-called the semi-Slav, and here, instead of the main line, which is e3 in this position, Magnus chooses the Catalan pawn structure and went on to play g3. After g3, d takes c4 happened, bishop g2, b5, trying to save this pawn, and now castling from Magnus. Bishop b7 is played, and now knight e5. The threat is knight takes b5, as you cannot take with a pawn, as your bishop will be hanging along the diagonal. That's why Firouzja in this position played a6, supporting the pawn. So after knight takes b5, there will be a takes b5. Here Magnus chooses to sacrifice a pawn by b3, looking for a positional compensation, like after c takes b3, for example, queen takes, or even a takes, followed by something like bishop g5, rook c1, rook b1, a4, and a huge pressure along these two files. But what happened in the game was different. b4, Firouzja chooses, and after b4 attacking the knight, knight a4, c3, creating a protected passed pawn here. So Firouzja or Magnus played a3, trying to destroy this pawn chain, but now a5 happened, so the c3 pawn will be supported. After a5, knight c4 back with the knight, attacking on a5, pressuring a5, attacking on b6 as well. So after knight c4, bishop a6, Firouzja played, and now a takes b4, and in this position, Firouzja should have played the easiest and the simplest move, which is a takes b4. Some ideas like knight b6 is there, here or there, but the most important idea is this. You do have the two connected or that protected pass pawn, and later on if you take, you might have two connected passers, but the b3 actually helped not being attacked, for the b4 pawn. So after a takes b4, bishop takes c4 was a bad move. Why? Because after b takes c4, a takes b4, now when I go queen b3, the b4 pawn will be under fire. Started by c5, Magnus prevented this bishop to support the pawn. So after c5, bishop e7, queen b3 attacking here on b4, and here Firouzja took the pawn on d4, bishop e3 attacking the queen, supporting c5 as well, and after queen g4, now h3, leaving this pawn unprotected, but it cannot be touched, because if you take, then there's knight takes c3, and after that, both queen and rook will be attacked, and white is winning. That's why after h3, queen h5 back, queen takes b4, the pawns are disappearing now after castling. Magnus should have played g4, but he went on to play the simplest move in this position, knight takes c3. Knight b d7, rook takes a8, rook takes a8, bishop takes c6, and now material is in white's favor. White is up a pawn, but actually the c5 pawn is under huge pressure, like once, twice, and thrice. So rook b8 attacking the queen was not the best move. Bishop takes c5, computer says, was actually better, and after bishop takes c5, bishop takes c5, now and only now, rook b8. However, what's played in the game was rook b8 directly, queen f4 is there, and now bishop takes c5. After bishop takes c5, bishop takes d7 is played, followed by knight takes d7, and now rook d1, very strong move. The knight is under fire, and the knight cannot move because the knight is protecting the rook. And in this position, if you play like a normal move or not a normal move, like for example bishop takes e3, you are losing on the spot. I'll give you 2 seconds trying to pause the video and find the winning idea for white. Actually, the winning idea was queen takes b8, and after knight takes b8, there's rook d8, checkmate. That's why in this position, e5 is played, so the queen cannot attack the rook. And after e5, Magnus, according to the computer, has to play queen a4, and he has a +1 advantage, but he played, or he favors or chooses queen g4, and after queen takes h takes, bishop takes e3, rook takes d7. Why Magnus choose and selected this line? First of all, he has much better time in this position, so if you look at the clock, probably 2 extra minutes. This is first. Second, if you are trying to win, not only trying to win, if you do have a knight against the bishop, it's always good to play if the pawns are on one side. Here in this position, we don't have play on the queen side. So the bishop actually loses his effect on the queen side. And now in this position, bishop c5 is played, and now a fantastic move by Magnus, played g5. Why this is a fantastic move? Actually, it kind of isolate the e5 pawn out the f6 protection. Now you cannot go f6 to protect the e5 pawn, because if you go f6, now I can, for example, take, and now the f6 pawn is very weak, the king is very weak, cannot leave the 8th rank. So after g5, bishop f8 is played, and now king g2. Magnus just improved the king. Rook e8 trying to support the pawn, but now knight e4. It's not only, wait a second, where are we? Let's go back. Okay, here we go. We are here. It's not only actually, this pawn is not only prevent these two pushes, but in the meantime, it kind of make this knight here stable. Stabilize the knight here. You cannot go f5 because of the pawn. Very great idea. Now after rook c8, Magnus played rook d5, attacking the pawn. Rook e8 protecting. Now king f3, improving the king. Bishop a3, moving aimlessly. Firouzja in this position. e3, bishop f8, and now king g4. What's the idea? It's very simple. King g4 and take the pawn. So Firouzja chooses to play king g8, but now he has less than a minute. After king h8, knight d2 back. Why knight d2? I want to regroup my knight to attack the pawn one more time. Here in this position, g6 is played. Knight c4 attacking the pawn twice. Bishop g7 trying to hold on, but now rook d7. A new weakness appeared, and after that knight d6 is a threat actually. So king g8, knight d6, attacking once, twice, and there's a fork. So probably this is the only move. But now after rook e7, how to support the knight after knight c4? What an idea. Here, Firouzja played f5. After f5, g takes f6, h5, great defense. You cannot go to g5 because bishop takes f6 will be a fork between these two guys. Now king h3 is played, and after that, rook takes f6. But what happened is the pawn structure is weaker and weaker. And this is actually what Magnus is doing. And it's for the computer, it's like meaningless. I mean, how can you make use of the weaknesses here and there? But for humans, it's huge. After knight e4, protecting and attacking, rook f5, rook e6, attacking again, king f7, and rook a6. Knight d6 is a threat, so that's stopped. And now I want to improve the king. King g2, f3 first, probably king f2, king e2, king g7, g4, attacking the rook in this position, takes, the rook went back. Now Magnus played rook e6, attacking both here and there. So bishop h4 is played, and after bishop h4, Magnus took the pawn, rook a8 happened, and after rook 8 in this position, simply rook to b5. After rook b5, rook e8 attacking the knight, the e3 pawn as well, the check happened, king h6, king f3 supporting, check, and rook d8 trying to stop any ideas of king d3. Rook b5 happened. Now Magnus wanted to play this strong move, which is g5, bishop e7 instead, because if you go, for example, like rook e8, a very interesting line, g5, king h5, there is knight f6 mate in one. So that's why here bishop e7 played, but now rook e5 attacking the bishop one more time. In this position, rook d7 has to be played, but with only 12 seconds on the clock. Bishop h4 happened. Now g5. Again, you cannot go here because of this very fantastic checkmate. So after g5, king g7, rook e7 check, king f8. And now this is actually a huge mistake by Firouzja, and rook h7 attacking the bishop. And usually they said whenever there are two squares between the knight and the bishop, the knight should be dominated by the bishop. But now the knight actually is the one who's dominating this bishop, because the bishop cannot go here, cannot go there, cannot go here or there because of the pawn and the knight. And now in this position, Firouzja, with only 8 seconds on the clock, resigned the game. I hope you find this useful. Subscribe to watch more. Thank you. See you soon.